In June of 1098, inside the walls of a city called Antioch, a Western army stood on the very edge of annihilation. For 8 brutal months they had besieged this city. Now, at last, it was theirs. And it had done them almost no good at all, because barely had they taken it when a vast Muslim army came up out of the east and surrounded them. Overnight, the besiegers had become the besieged, trapped inside the very walls they had bled to break into. There was no food. There was no way out. Men were starving, deserting, dying. Every rational calculation said they were finished. And then a ragged, half-starved pilgrim came to the leaders with a strange claim. He had seen a vision, he said, and he knew where a holy relic lay buried beneath the city, the very lance that had pierced the side of Christ on the cross. Find it, he promised, and God would give them the victory. It was almost certainly a fraud. It would also, somehow, be the thing that saved them. This is the story of the First Crusade, the one crusade of them all that, against every reasonable expectation, actually reached its impossible goal. A journey that swung over and over between total destruction and something that looked, to the people living through it, exactly like a miracle. Sincere faith and terrible slaughter, often in the same men on the same day. Blood and miracle. Let's get into it. Welcome back to History with Rohrmann. This is episode 2 of our 6-part series on the Crusades, and it picks up exactly where the last one ended. When we left off, the great armies of the First Crusade, tens of thousands of Western fighting men under lords like Godfrey of Bouillon, Bohemond, and Raymond of Toulouse, had just set out east in 1096, heading for the meeting point at Constantinople. Today we follow them the whole way, to the walls of the richest Christian city on earth, across the killing plains of Anatolia, through the epic siege of Antioch, and finally to Jerusalem itself on the 15th of July, 1099. 3 worlds are about to collide, the Latin West, the Byzantine East, and the Islamic world, and none of them will come out unchanged. They arrived in waves through the winter of 1096 and into 1097, and the first great shock of the crusade was not a battle. It was a city. Nothing in Western Europe had prepared these men for Constantinople. Back home, a large town was a few thousand people behind a wooden wall. Here was a metropolis of perhaps 500,000 souls, ringed by the mightiest fortifications in the world, glittering with gold and marble and domes, its markets stuffed with silks and relics and riches these rough knights had never imagined could exist. They stared at it like children, and the man who ruled it was watching them very carefully. This was Alexios the First, the Byzantine emperor, the same man who, a few years earlier, had sent west asking for help. But Alexios had asked for a few regiments of professional mercenaries. What turned up at his gates instead was an enormous, unruly flood of armed foreigners, led by proud and ambitious lords, some of whom had fought against his empire before. He did not see rescuers. He saw a danger camped outside the wealthiest city on earth. So Alexios played the game he knew best. He dazzled the crusade leaders with gifts and gold, then pressed them, one by one, to swear him an oath of loyalty, promising to hand back to the empire any former Byzantine lands they might capture. To the Westerners this was insulting, and several bristled and stalled. But Alexios controlled the food, the boats, and the road onward, and in the end, grudgingly, most of them swore. It worked for now, but something had curdled. The Latins decided the Greeks were slippery and arrogant. The Greeks decided the Latins were greedy barbarians. That mutual distrust, born right here at the start, would poison the relationship between these two Christian worlds for centuries. For the moment, though, the emperor shipped his troublesome guests across the water into Asia, and out of his empire's heart, which was rather the point. Ahead of them now lay Turkish land. Their first target was Nicaea, a strong walled city that was then a Turkish capital, sitting beside a wide lake. The Crusaders laid siege in May of 1097, and it was hard fighting. But as the city teetered on the edge of falling, its defenders quietly did something clever. They surrendered in secret not to the Crusaders but to the Byzantines. So one morning the Westerners looked up to see imperial banners already flying over the walls. The city was taken, and they had been cheated of the storming and the plunder they felt they had earned with their blood. Alexios sent gifts around to smooth it over, but the Crusaders were furious, and their suspicion of Byzantium hardened another notch. Still, Nicaea had fallen. The road was open. They marched on. A few days out, near a place called Dorylaeum, the crusade very nearly died in a single morning. The army had split into two columns, and on the 1st of July, 1097, the Seljuk Turks fell on the leading one, the force under Bohemond, with a way of fighting the Westerners had never faced. These were horse archers. Fast, loose swarms of mounted men who galloped in, loosed clouds of arrows, and wheeled away again before the heavy Frankish knights could close with them. Surrounded, hammered from every direction, Bohemond's men climbed down off their horses, packed tight around the women and the baggage, and simply endured, hour after hour, praying for the rest of the army to arrive. And it did. Around midday, the second column, Godfrey and Raymond and the rest, came storming over the hills into the Turkish rear. Caught between two Christian forces, the Seljuks broke and fled. It was the Crusades' first great victory in open battle, and it taught both sides something. The Westerners learned how the Turks fought, and the Turks learned that these armored Franks, once they got their hands on you, were terrifyingly hard to kill. But the enemy that did the crusade the most damage in Anatolia never drew a sword at all. It was the land itself. Ahead lay the burnt heart of Anatolia in high summer, a country the retreating Turks had deliberately stripped bare. For weeks the army trudged across a scorched plateau under a merciless sun, with no water and no food. Men drank from filthy puddles. The heat killed horses by the hundreds, until knights who had ridden to war in mail were reduced to walking on foot or riding oxen, their armor loaded onto the few surviving pack animals, even onto dogs. Many of the poorest simply lay down and died. This was not an enemy anyone had pictured. No glory and no battle, just thirst and dust and the slow grinding down of an army by a landscape. And it was only a taste of the road ahead. Somewhere in here, one of the lords, Baldwin, Godfrey's brother, peeled off to the east with a small band and made himself lord of the wealthy city of Edessa. It became the very first Crusader state established in 1098, and it would matter enormously later on. But it was a sideshow. The main army had its eyes fixed south, on the road to Jerusalem, and that road ran straight through the single greatest obstacle of the entire crusade. In October of 1097, the Crusaders reached Antioch. It was a monster. Once one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, Antioch sat behind colossal fortifications. Miles of walls studded with hundreds of towers, climbing right up the mountainside above the city, far too vast for the Crusaders to fully surround. They could not storm it. They could not seal it off. So they settled in for a siege, and the siege slowly began to swallow them. It lasted 8 months, and as autumn turned into a wet, bitter winter, the besiegers started to starve. They had eaten out the surrounding country, and now their own food ran out. War horses were slaughtered for meat until only a couple hundred were left in the whole army. Men ate their boots, and worse. There are dark rumors in the chronicles from this winter, whispers of the starving digging up the dead, even of cannibalism, the kind of thing an army only speaks of when it has been pushed clean past the edge of what people can endure. Many gave up and slipped away in the night, and still Antioch would not fall. In the end, it fell not to force but to betrayal. Bohemond, the most ruthless and ambitious of the leaders, had opened a secret line to a man inside the city, a tower captain named Firuz, who for reasons of his own agreed to turn traitor. On the night of the 2nd of June, 1098, Firuz let a party of Bohemond's men climb up into his tower. They opened a gate from the inside, the Crusaders poured in, and by the morning of the 3rd of June, after 8 months of hell, Antioch was theirs. They had, perhaps, one day to celebrate, because bearing down on Antioch, already almost at the gates, was a brand new Muslim army. A huge relief force out of the city of Mosul, led by a powerful commander named Kerbogha. It arrived within days of the city's fall, swept around the walls, and shut the Crusaders in. And now the nightmare turned completely upside down. The men who had spent 8 starving months besieging Antioch from the outside were suddenly trapped starving inside it, besieged in their turn by a fresh and enormous enemy. There was barely any food and nowhere left to run. Kerbogha's hosts sat down outside and simply waited for hunger to do the work. More crusaders deserted, lowering themselves over the walls on ropes in the dark. To very nearly everyone, it was over. This was the lowest, most hopeless moment of the entire crusade. And it was here, at rock bottom, that the miracle arrived. A poor pilgrim in the camp, a man named Peter Bartholomew, came forward with a vision. Saint Andrew, he said, had appeared to him and revealed that a great relic lay buried right there in Antioch, in the Cathedral of St. Peter. The Holy Lance, the spearhead a Roman soldier had once driven into the side of Christ as he hung on the cross. Find it, and it was a sign that God would deliver them. So they dug. In the floor of the cathedral, watched by desperate, exhausted men, they dug for hours, and then Peter Bartholomew himself climbed down into the pit and came back up holding a piece of iron. The Holy Lance. Almost certainly it was staged. Even some of the leaders at the time suspected it was a fraud. But here is the thing about the Holy Lance. It does not really matter whether it was genuine. What mattered was what it did. Word of it swept through the starving army like fire, and men who the day before had been ready to lie down and die were suddenly lit up with a wild, unstoppable, fanatical certainty that God was with them. And an army that believes God is with it is a very dangerous thing. On the 28th of June, 1098, they bet everything on that certainty. The Crusaders threw open the gates of Antioch and marched out, gaunt and ragged, many of them on foot because their horses had long since been eaten, straight at Kerbogha's far larger army, with the Holy Lance carried before them like a banner. By every rule of war, they should have been destroyed. They weren't. And the reason is one of the quiet truths running underneath this whole crusade. The Muslim world facing them was deeply, fatally divided. Kerbogha's army was really a coalition of rival emirs who did not trust him and did not trust each other. Several of them more afraid that Kerbogha would grow too strong than they were of the strange Frankish invaders. As the Crusaders came on with that terrifying, faith-crazed momentum, the coalition cracked. Whole contingents hung back. Some simply turned and rode away. And the vast host that had trapped the Crusaders came apart and fled the field. It was an astonishing, against all odds victory, the miracle of Antioch. And no sooner was it won than the Crusaders fell to quarreling over the prize. Bohemond claimed Antioch for himself and flatly refused to hand it back to the emperor. Oath or no oath, one more crack in that already broken trust. But the road south was finally open, and at the end of it stood the city they had crossed the world to reach. In early 1099, the Crusade set out on its last march, down along the coast toward the Holy Land, the local rulers mostly choosing to let this dangerous army pass rather than fight it. And in a final twist, the Jerusalem they were marching toward had just changed hands. While the Crusaders were pinned down at Antioch, the Fatimids of Egypt, the Shia rivals of the Seljuk Turks, had swept in and taken Jerusalem for themselves. So the men waiting behind its walls were not even the Turks the Crusade had first set out to fight, but a different Muslim power entirely. It changed nothing for the army on the road. After 3 years after everything, on the 7th of June, 1099, the Crusaders crested the last hills and saw it at last. Jerusalem, the center of their world. Many of them wept and knelt and prayed. Then they looked harder at the walls, and the joy went cold. Jerusalem was a fortress, and there were far fewer Crusaders now than had ever set out. Disease and battle and desertion had worn the army down to a fraction of its old size. They had almost no timber for siege engines in that dry country, little water in the brutal summer heat, and a garrison that had pushed the local Christians out and stocked the city to wait them out. An early, unprepared assault failed bloodily. Then 2 things saved the siege. Genoese ships reached the nearby coast and were broken up for their timber and their skilled carpenters, finally giving the Crusaders the wood to build tall rolling siege towers. And in a strange and telling moment, the whole army, barefoot and fasting and carrying crosses, walked in solemn procession all the way around the city walls, while the defenders jeered from above. Then they went back to hammering their towers together. Faith and engineering side by side. On the night of the 13th of July, they rolled the towers forward. For 2 days they fought their way toward the ramparts through a storm of arrows and fire. And on the 15th of July, 1099, the Crusaders drove a tower up against the wall, forced a foothold on the battlements, and fought their way into the city. The gates were thrown open. Jerusalem had fallen. And then something happened that horrified even the people of that hard age. What followed the fall of Jerusalem was a massacre. The Crusaders, delirious with victory and with 3 years of accumulated suffering, poured through the streets and killed on a scale that stunned the medieval world. Muslims and Jews alike, fighters and civilians, over 2 terrible days. The chroniclers of the Crusade, men who were on their own side, described it in language so extreme it is still hard to read today. We will not linger on the details, but we do have to be honest about it because it sits at the dark heart of this whole story. The same men, in the very same hours, who wept with holy joy and went to pray at the tomb of Christ, had just carried out one of the most infamous slaughters of the entire Middle Ages. Ecstatic devotion and horrifying butchery, in the same place on the same day. That is the First Crusade. That is what blood and miracle actually means. When it was over, the Crusaders had to decide what they had made. They offered to make Godfrey of Bouillon their king. And Godfrey, the devout one, refused the title. He would not wear a crown of gold, he said, in the city where Christ had worn a crown of thorns. Instead, he took a humbler name, Advocate of the Holy Sepulchre, protector of the great church built over the tomb of Christ. It was the 22nd of July, 1099. Weeks later, the Fatimids of Egypt marched up to take Jerusalem back, and on the 12th of August, 1099, the Crusaders met and shattered that relief army at Ascalon, near the sea. That victory sealed the conquest. Against all reason, the First Crusade had done the impossible thing it set out to do. And there is one last quiet note. Far away in Italy, the man who had started all of it, Pope Urban II, who had preached the crusade at Clermont, died on the 29th of July, 1099, only 2 weeks after Jerusalem fell. The news had not yet reached him. He went to his grave never knowing that the holy city had been taken. So the Crusaders had won. They had crossed the known world, survived starvation and slaughter and the killing sun, and taken Jerusalem, the one and only time a crusade would ever truly reach that goal. But look at what they actually held. A thin scatter of Christian cities and castles, Jerusalem, Antioch, Edessa, clinging to the edge of the Holy Land, thousands of kilometers from home, defended by a few thousand men who were, quite reasonably, already thinking about sailing back. All around them stretched the Muslim world they had beaten only because it happened, for one brief moment, to be divided. And that world would not stay divided forever. Taking Jerusalem had been the miracle. Holding it would be the nightmare. That is where we go next time in Episode 3, Life in the Strange Crusader Kingdom Overseas, the Rise of the Warrior Monks, and, far to the east, the slow gathering of a Muslim response that would one day produce the man who takes it all back. If you're enjoying the series, subscribe, and I'll see you in Episode 3.